To welcome you all to Lichtundfire. I'm Priska, I'm the director of Lichtundfire, and we've been here for almost 8 years in the fall. And yes, what you see is what you get. We are a modest space, one white box space, but we had quite a bit of success with the space, and we have an emphasis on group exhibitions often, and that's actually how we also introduced Rodney to the space here first. We had Rodney in a group exhibition in February this year called Refracture, and there we had actually a combination of painting and works on paper, and I think that's where we also discovered that there was a great response to the works on paper once we had introduced them.
All our friends here and our supporters, and especially the panelists who are new and long-time friends. Mixture. And may I start to introduce everybody briefly. Alvin Hall, to the left, is an award-winning broadcaster, author, and financial educator. Alvin created and produced the podcast series Driving the Green Book, and just published the book with the same title at Harper One. A film he co-produced on the same subject was an official selection of the 31st Pan-African Film Festival. His work in radio includes The Green Book, Alvin Hall Goes Back to School, Who Sold the Soul, and among many others, got the Wincott Award for Financial Journalism and Broadcasting. While hosting the BBC television series Your Money or Your Life, he authored a number of bestsellers, including You and Your Money, It's More Than Just the Numbers, as well as the children's book Show Me the Money, which has been published in 20 foreign languages. Barbara Hoffman, next to Alvin, the principal of Hoffman Law Firm, is a preeminent arts, cultural heritage, and cultural institution lawyer in New York City, providing transactional advice and litigation services to the domestic and international arts and culture community. And Barbara is, as Alvin, a big supporter of the arts, collects art, and is in various institutions as a board member, as a performer. And she is included in New York's magazine Best Lawyers 2010 to 2011, and up to the present, I would say. Lilly Wei is a New York-based independent curator, writer, journalist, and critic, whose area of interest is global contemporary art and emerging arts and artists, reporting frequently on international exhibitions and biennials. She has written for dozens of publications as Art News, Art in America, Brooklyn Rail, and is the author of numerous artist catalogs and monographs, and has curated exhibitions in the United States, Europe, and Asia. Next to Lilly is the artist, Rodney Zelenka, born in Panama, and we actually met a couple of years ago, and this is my fourth show with the artist within the span of 2 years, so that says a lot, I would say. And he is actually now doing a tour of his work in various museums that Pancho Lopez curated, and it goes along the border to the United States. So it started in Ensenada, Baja California, and Tijuana next week, also Baja California. It goes to various other museums all the way to Monterrey and Querétaro in 2024. And so this is a symbolic gesture by the curator, because his work is a lot about migration, as you can see, and is symbolically in all these museums that are right on the border, where a lot of people pass through. May they come from Mexico or Africa. And that is one of the subjects and concepts of Rodney's work, is the global migration, the global displacement. And here we come to our friend Orlando Hernandez Ying, who is the Associate Curator at the Hispanic Society. And he dedicated 20 years to museums and higher education in his native Panama. That's where they know each other, the artist in Orlando. And he is the head curator of was the head curator of the Anthropology Museum and held the position of National Coordinator of Museums, where he oversaw 18 museums across the country. His trajectory in the U.S. includes collaborations with MoMA, the Met, the Walters Museum in Baltimore, and the historic New Orleans collection. The causes in his art. How can the artist implement these impressions?
Okay, first I want to thank everybody for coming, and for Priska and for Elga for organizing this event, surrounded by such heavyweights, not only on this side of the table, but on that side of the audience. I think we're all very experienced and intelligent public, and I'm here as an artist to experience your perception, receive feedback from you. I already have my own sense of inspiration. I've been doing this for over, I think my first painting I did when I was 6, and that was, I'm already 70, so that was a pretty long time ago. And before I came here today, I went to have a cold shower at the MoMA to see what the MoMA had to say and inspire myself with all the great work that is at the MoMA, and to humble myself to realize what I'm here and what is this all about. So it's a humbling experience and an honor to be sitting here. I believe that everybody that is showing at the MoMA and in every museum is the personality of the artist coming out. And I think everybody in one way or another reflects their understanding of the universe and the world, and they all have their discourse, and they're all political. Because as some great writer once said, I think and then I exist. I think everybody does that from its principle. So if you don't think, you don't exist, and we have to think about our life. So Elga made a show in Spain called All Is Art, All Is Politics, and it's natural that everything we talk about has a political implication. Religion is politics, your life is politics, being a parent is politics, being a student is politics, being a child is politics. Everything is a relationship between power. And my work is a statement on power, abuse of power, and art as a way to talk about power.
Alvin, would you like to elaborate on that, or would you like me to go to the next question? You have the questions in front of you, but we don't have to stick to the questions. We can ensue a conversation.
Yeah,
also.
So the idea, how does an artist become motivated to express political, social, environmental causes? I feel that it has to be personal for the artist. If it's not personal and the artist is not connected to it, then the work is very much in the artist's head. And therefore that deep emotional connection that the viewer needs to be motivated, needs to reach the work, will not be necessarily as present as it is if it comes from a deep personal place. Whether it is for the environment, whether it is for social justice, no matter, it has to come from a deep personal place. Many years ago, I did a television show for the BBC, and I went around the world, Tanzania, Malawi, India, Cambodia, and I talked to these social entrepreneurs in each of these places who had gone there, who found a problem, whether it was child labor, whether it was hunger, whether it was young women being made brides, very young. They found in this something that moved them deeply, and all of them set up various NGOs in these places. And to talk to those people about that, it wasn't in their heads, it was in their hearts and soul, and that motivated them to get on planes, to raise money. And I think the same is true for artists. You have to have a personal connection to this to be able to say something that will connect to another person. The means you choose depends upon your skill set. So some people it's film, some people it's music. For me, it's words, but you have to use it to the best of your ability to connect to the emotions of the people. And it's from that emotional place that people will be motivated to do something.
Okay, Barbara, would you like to?
Based on these two interactions, I would like to sharpen the focus. What were those events in your life that connected you viscerally to the work that you produced?
Well, today at the moment I saw a photograph of a homeless crawling on the floor trying to save a cactus. And the photographer was talking about the boots that the homeless was wearing, and he was sliding on the floor like a soldier. But to me it had a totally different resonance. It was like he was saving the flower or the pot from being run over. So there's many ways of looking at reality. Alvin talks about the feeling. Yes, I come from a family that experienced the Holocaust, but I identify with Alvin's experience of writing the book writing the Green Book, and I have really studied in my own way the experience of Black Americans, African Americans, Chinese Americans, Indian Americans, Panamanians, and when I have been exhibiting in Mexico, related to migration, everybody feels as if I'm relating to their problem. And I have paintings that are called child abuse. I have paintings that are called gender abuse. I have paintings of deforestation, of forest fires, of contamination, of global warming. All these things are, for me, I feel responsible as a citizen of this planet to relate to all these things. I cannot sit aside and see this happen. And when Barbara was invited to be here, I said, what do I ask a lawyer about art? And I wonder, I say, why does the legal system in the world permit the barbaric things that happen in the world? If there's an order, why does it happen? I'm sure she doesn't have an answer because it's not her fault, but the world is barbaric. And Alvin, I feel it. And I feel the suffering, and I also feel the beauty. And I have a lot of paintings about beauty, sunsets, birds, chirping, greens, and it's not all about abuse of power. It's also about and this painting in particular is called a moment of silence or something like that, where everything suddenly disappears and you don't have the stress.
Yes.
So I agree with you that there has to be that emotion.
Well, I have a question only, just because you were talking about how varied your interests were, your sympathies are. And of course, currently, it seems to me that we are very limited in what we can identify with, and that's an issue. What do you think of that? In terms of, if you're Black, then you get to tell your story. If I'm Chinese, I should stick to the Chinese story. If you're Panamanian by the Holocaust, I don't, think that that's what we should do, but I'm just asking, what do you think of that as,
Well, the painting just behind you is a Ku Klux Klan being hung.
No, but yeah.
And I'm not a Black.
But you think, well, anyway.
I have to oppose it.
Yeah.
This makes sense. And a lot of these things happen. So you don't have to be like, my response is we should feel connected to everybody's problems. And I had a conversation with Alvin a few minutes ago, and I also think that our structural education system that we've been inherited for the last 5,000 years has also brought us to feel like there's a Western thing, there's an Eastern thing, there's the empires of the West, the empires of the East, and although those are the bad people, these are the good people, and the bad, and I think we're all brainwashed. I think I think that's a wrong way of looking at it. I think there should be a better understanding of all cultures.
Yes?
Orlando, as a curator, what do you see as being that point where empathy and imagination lead to a leap? Because you look at a lot of work.
Yes, and at the same time, I think that it has been very compartmentalized. I agree with what has been said here, that people think that you only own the part that everybody else can see of you, the visible part of you. But there's of everyone, there's an underlying of cultures and identities and subcultures and communities. That could be LGBTQ, it could be people that are migrating from one place to the other, people that don't speak English as their first language, people that have other sexual identities, and art should break that boundary, and I think that's exactly what it does. It creates a space for dialogue, whether the dialogue is among people like us or the general audiences, or whether it's with an individual in front of a work of art, just like feeling the empathy, because in the end, and I hope not to be too reductive, but it's the human race, and we all can feel that empathy with the suffering and the causes of someone else.
Barbara, you could talk about our experience at the Sharjah Biennial, which was a fabulous experience and a lot of political work, which I didn't expect. It was a total surprise to us to go to a biennial in the Emirates and find a lot of political art and wonderful artists from all over Africa. I met actually an artist and a gallery owner from Sudan. I don't know if you met her too, Barbara. And she wrote to me recently that she had to flee. She had to leave everything behind and flee to Egypt. So that was for me the most, immediate experience that resulted from the political situation in those countries. Barbara.
So, as a lawyer, I'm not used to having other people talk for me. Thank you very much, Elga. So, that's the first point. And I really wasn't exactly sure why I was invited to participate, and I wasn't familiar with Rodney's work, but I do want to say I really agree with what I've heard so far, and I think we all come to an experience or an artwork bringing our own histories to it. And I certainly had traveled and lived all over the world, and I went to law school to become a civil rights lawyer. So you mentioned that, and I'm still very active in the whole Hague Convention. the whole idea of illicit trafficking in works of art and people. So I come to that experience and have tried in my legal career always to give voice to people who have not had it. And I think that one of the things that I'm seeing and feeling in your work, which is what Alvin said too, and I couldn't agree more, is that one, whatever you're doing, it's clear that you have a passion for that, and that comes out and that really rings true. And I think that the experience that somebody seeing this will bring to it is based on that idea of looking for and hearing your voice and empathy. So that, I think, is something that is very important about your work and important in terms of what we're looking for in the world and in the creation of art. I think one of the things when I came in that resonated with me, which is probably totally unrelated to when you were creating this work, but related to migration, is I was just in Ireland, and it was extraordinary because these people that I was with, and in the Irish newspapers were reading some things from Italy and in Ireland about the Titanic and the people, these billionaires who died. And I am looking at this kind of influence of these works and the kind of Star Wars technology, almost Titanic exploration qualities contrasted with the poverty. And when I heard about this, I thought at the time, and now I think people, why are people spending so much time talking about these billionaires? Of course it's sad that they have died, but what about the migrants and people who don't have a choice to go, about whether or not they go and risk their lives and end up at the bottom of the ocean, and these other people who do it as a joyous thing. And I think in some strange way that dilemma that you're posing between the richness of the gold and the migration of people, and really speaks to that issue of, as you say, the power structure is in your works in some way, and it's not dulled. I mean, and power is about the law and who controls the law. So I don't want to say any more just in terms of the dialogue. I should never let a lawyer talk anyway. But in terms of what Elga said about Georgia, I think that for me, one of the most interesting things about it, which relates to curating and to artists, is that Georgia Biennial was an homage to Oquientur, and the title of it was Thinking Historically in the Present, which I thought was such a rich title to help people explore exactly who they are, because thinking historically can mean so many different things, and then people's presents are totally different. So it sort of embodies in many ways, I think, what you're trying to do in your own history, which you bring to that. That's enough for me.
I wanted to say two things about what you just said. First, this thing in the back is called Migration Road. And it's the boots screaming and kicking the people that are being protected or grabbed by the spider or the power. But why are you here was an idea I had. And I said to Elga, I said, Elga, I want to break the mold. I don't want any more panels with art critics and nothing personal. art critics, I want to bring in other interdisciplinary ideas where they can connect in a similar way, and they can speak their own experiences, and you as a human rights lawyer, I'm interested in what you see in the work and what you feel and how you identify. That was the purpose of setting up this panel of different interdisciplinaries so that we could enrich the conversation between law, art, literature, art critics, historians, curators, and that was the purpose of bringing a lawyer into this panel.
Well, thank you. I did have a question about your iconography.
Yes.
Because of the spider, because it appears frequently, and so it represents power. Would you like to discuss that a bit?
Well, I want to talk about copyrights. I stole the idea from bourgeois.
That's what, well, I would have asked, I didn't want to teach
And
you.
when bourgeois uses all the things, and she has all these sexual problems and everything, and the spider, it just, and then I think there's an intellectual web, and the media is like a web. And we're engulfed by a web. And what better symbolism of a web is there than a spider that sets the web, captures, controls, and puts it aside and keeps working on the web. And that's why the spider in these particular works is something I repeat, because I believe we're engulfed by a web.
Well, you know, when looking at the spider, there were some which I wasn't sure what the role was, because it almost seemed maternal. I mean, I felt it was rescuing rather than destroying, right? So that was what I was curious about, because
that's what a web is. It entices you, it brings you, it sticks you, it attracts you.
And I read Charlotte's Web, you know, at a very young age, and everything's you know, helpful. So yeah, and then you have the bird, you know.
Well, the birds is always like something in a little bit of more light, and although in one of them, the red one, the birds are also being a victim because they also migrate, and they migrate, and the migration not only is human, but even animals migrate. Moving from one place and they find better food, and the humans are not only the ones that migrate. It's a natural phenomenon.
And then something else, I don't know that I noticed it here so much, but I have seen it in your work, that the objects that accompanies, you know, all the migrations, they seem to be pretty in the foreground. And the people, you know, they look almost, because they're in black and white. It's an interesting.
I'm announcing the future. Elga said I was very realistic in my works in 2020. And in 2020, I wanted to reinvent myself. I said, I'm tired of my realism. I cannot compete with Rembrandt, and I cannot compete with all these great masters that embody so well. So when I was dealing with migration and with power and with waste, there was always objects and the objects and the objects and the objects. And I said to myself, what if I make the objects and give the object personalities? Mm-hmm. So I started like a Lego, putting the objects together, and then the objects started having shapes. And I said, you know what, this is interesting. Well, how do I give objects personalities? So I stick a mouth in a suitcase, I stick a mouth in a boot, I stick an eye in a, and then I started making what I call my transformers. So my new production in the next coming years, and already since a year and a half ago, is I'm working with transformers. But the objects also become like landscapes, because if you see dumps and you walk on the street, you see so much garbage, they're like landscapes already. So I'm using them as landscapes, and I'm using them as figurative objects.
Can you elaborate a little bit on the use of gold and the cluttering of these objects, and in what context do they, you know, work with each other? And especially of this trio of works over here, where there's gold and this clump of forms, Jelly Alvin.
Well, Rauschenberg is one of the it's not the forefather, but I always liked Rauschenberg's work. It's collages. Mm-hmm. and there's so much work with collages of artists before. So when I started working with paper, gold is this is 22 karat gold, and it's very difficult. And I like the cracks. The cracks to me is like breaking a piece of glass. It's also a crack. A crack to me is like imbalanced. It's like breaking. The gold is a good contrast with black, and I'm trying to be a little bit more minimalist in my colorful tropical background. So much of this work is black and white and brown. So gold is a good contrast, and there's one with silk with aluminum. But basically, and gold is also symbolical as rich. So it's meant to be what migration wants. The green garden in the neighbor is better than mine. So it's also something political.
It's just a question about political art. You know, Jack's work was not overtly political, and that was one of the problems, because he was a black artist who was not doing overtly political work. So, right, and so here's a question, so what is a political artist? You know, a political artist, I think we all did agree on that, you know, it's all political. So that he was, in another way, being political. And if you think about the South American artists, you know, like from a country that had been under dictatorships for so long, they make abstract work, but that's political, because that's all they can make. So, you know, I remember talking to a Colombian artist years ago, and he said, you know, I make political work because I have no choice because of where I live. And that's, you know, and that's deeply felt. Well, you know differently. Yeah, too. So yes, I agree with everything everyone said.
And I think we have to think of this work sometimes as so far ahead of the curve that I remember I interviewed Faith Ringgold and Sar, Betty Sar, and I also talked to Jack, and I used to say, isn't it wonderful that you've lived long enough to see the world realize what you were saying? And I always tell everybody, you just have to live long enough, because eventually somebody will realize, and they'll bring you back into the fold. Right now I'm involved with this organization, and they've discovered this African-American gay artist, a guy I knew very well who had drug problems. And I just think about Krishna almost every day, because he's being rediscovered. He was always radical, and the work was so wonderfully torn photographs, painted, slashed, was just remarkable work. And now they're catching up with it. So I think a lot of it is time and people's eyes opening. It may be some other work that brings them to it, but they'll find a path to the work with the strength and the emotions that we need to be sustained.
If I can just create a little bit of goosebumps in your skin when you look at my work, that's enough for me.
Okay, maybe we can open questions to the audience. Would anybody from the audience like to ask the panelists a question? Yes?
Hey, Alvin. I'm Craig.
Hi, Craig.
You spoke at Maison 10.
I did speak at Maison 10.
Yes. I wasn't able to make it that night, but I was in the hospital, and that was the one night I wish arthritis wasn't plaguing my life. Tommy Henry, I love him to death.
Yes.
Can you just tell me a little bit, because I've been to recap about the Green Book. I mean, you've obviously seen the movie. It's more than a movie, though. It's a real life piece of context.
Yes.
What really inspired you, I guess, if you would say?
Okay.
Hope you don't take this negatively, but what made you rebrand the Green Book?
Okay. A reminute version of this. Okay. I discovered the Green Book while flying to London to do television shows, and I never heard of it. And by chance, a guy in Britain saw the Green Book and called me out of the blue and asked me would I be willing to do a radio show about this for the BBC. I said yes, and that led to the journey. I went up to the Schomburg and found out about it. We did a show that was from my past in Tallahassee, Florida, because I was raised in segregation through the historic civil rights, Selma, Birmingham, Memphis, to Ferguson, because Michael Brown had just been killed. During that interview, during that road trip to record that radio program, which is still available on the BBC, I was so deeply moved by the stories that I heard. And I couldn't forget them. They stayed in me. And I knew there was more stories out there. And what I then did was I came up with the idea of taking a road trip from Detroit to the South. Why? Because in 1910, the African American population of Detroit was 1.2%. By 1970, it was 43.6%. That's a huge increase. Why? And all those people had to come from the South. So that's when I did the road trip south, to rediscover not just the Green Book, but the people who had used it, the businesses that were featured in it, the communities that were a part of it, and that led me to the work that I do now. I think that was 3 minutes.
Anyone else has a question to the panelists? Yes, please.
Yes, I'd like to ask the artist a question. What has been your experience in life from the time you were a child, when you first started drawing, to now? What has been your experience with the line, or in Spanish, la línea, the line? You obviously are a master of it, and it's something that you've worked your whole life. What has been your experience? You've done so many different things. I'm sure when you were a child, you started with the line, and then you worked into different things, and now you're back with the line. What has been your personal journey experience with the line?
Okay, I did it the other way around. I started abstract, then I went into psychedelics, and then it was like I had done some mushrooms in college, and I went into the theory of chaos in order, the crackling, how it repeats itself, and I started doing patterns, and I studied Van Gogh's movement. I thought he was such a genius to create this movement, and when you do psychedelics, it just everything moves around. And then about 40 years ago, I had the unique experience. I'm a self-taught artist. I studied economics and government politics in Cornell. And 40 years ago, I went to study etching with a craft etcher in Madrid, Julio Sacristan, who's now deceased only a few months ago, but he is considered one of the masters of etching. So I went to him and he started teaching me how to do etching. And I started realizing what the etching was. And then the Orientals, I do martial arts, and I also started doing the drawing. And I left that. I went back into canvases, and you don't draw. So recently, Elga said to me, leave the canvases and do some works on paper. And suddenly I was confronted again with the pencil and the pen and the ink, and it all came back. And I had a fear, because you have to, but the hand started working on its own, and I suddenly realized I hadn't lost anything. As a matter of fact, it became very exciting. As Alvin says, I can't stop painting. And my wife tells me, you gotta leave it. And I said, no, I just gotta continue. And I just wake up every day, I just go into my studio, and sometimes I just want to wake up the next morning to continue painting, and I just have that drive. And I said to myself, well, I'm 70, and I have a calling, so just go for it.
Okay, I think on this note, this beautiful note, we can wrap it up.
Thank you very much.